All right. So Dave Evans is the owner and studio director for Falling Squirrel, a Niagara-based indie game dev specializing in the advancement of narrative design and audio game mechanics for visually impaired accessibility. The studio's current project, The Vale, is an audio-based action-adventure title slated for launch on PC early next year. And I think we have a copy of The Vale in the showcase. So if you want to try it out, it's available. And when Dave's not making games, he's having photo ops with extremely cute baby goats. So that's Dave. Please give him a warm welcome.
Hello? Oh. That's a reminder I need to change my LinkedIn profile picture. I am with a goat because it's the best picture I had of myself. Happen to have a goat in it, so what are you going to do? So my talk is called The Soundscape is Worth 1,000 Words. I thought between 2 months ago and now when I came up with it, I thought I'd think of a more interesting title. I did not. I think this is good enough. I think this is going to be a slightly, probably not rambling, but free-form conversation about my work on this game called The Vale. And this is the first time I'm doing this talk. So at the end, my last slide says questions, big question mark. We won't be doing questions out here, but absolutely after the talk, you can come over and ask me questions, and in particular, maybe give me comments on how I might improve this talk. So we'll see how this goes. So the purpose of this talk in general is, and I'm hoping there's two things hopefully you'll get out of it. For people that are making narrative-driven games, maybe that are visually based, I'm hoping there might be some things that we've found in terms of the freedom that working in all audio grants a writer, and some of the techniques and things we found that really support narrative in games that we found audio as a particularly good job of strengthening. I'm hoping you'll get maybe some tips on how you might add this to your own visual projects as well. I'm going to do a little bit of advocating for making audio-based or audio-focused games and potentially games that are also accessible for the visually impaired. And I think I've come across a few arguments as to why there's space for more people to be doing this. So first about me, I have been working, I started in the film and television industry. I worked as a director and a writer, making short films and music videos. I usually got Bravo grants or something. I wasn't making any money really doing that, but it was a chance for me to be an artist, and it was a lot of fun coming out of film school doing that. I was also an actor in commercials. I was not very good. And I also did a stint on an Animal Planet special. I played a mermaid scientist, which was this very weird 15 minutes of fame I had to endure. And then I got an agent and became a screenwriter, which meant I worked in a parking lot, and I wrote screenplays. And anybody who's starting out in writing who wants to be a screenwriter or work on their own projects, I highly recommend getting a nice automated lot. It's an incredibly comfortable place to work, and you get minimum wage, but you get to make screenplays. So what got me out of that lifestyle? I got an opportunity to work as a cinema director in AAA games, where I took all my film know-how and brought it to voice actor direction, some writing, camera blocking, and motion capture direction. So that's what I did in AAA. I found that a lot of the work you do in AAA, and I actually, the talk before this sort of picked up on I think, the ways the industry's moved on from where it was, or at least the company I worked at was when I was there. A lot of the narrative was siloed within cutscenes, so I spent my time doing about 2 hours of cutscenes, trying to take a small team and sort of squeeze cutscenes out of them to cover most of the narrative. And the actual mechanics of the gameplay, there's very little narrative being presented in the heart of the game, and I didn't enjoy that. So when I did get an opportunity to leave AAA to go into indie, that was the first thing I signaled in on, was trying to make games that where the narrative would come out naturally in the mechanics of the gameplay. I was also a freelance writer, creative consultant, and then I founded Falling Squirrel, which we're working on right now, a game called The Vale. I'm going to run some video in a second just to give you just sort of a sense of the tone and feel of the game. But basically, it's an action-adventure game with some RPG elements. It's 5 to 10 hours of gameplay, roughly. And we focused on quality voice performance. It's probably the thing. It's also probably the thing that I'm the best at trying to get with really talented actors here in Toronto. Emotionally engaging story, and ultimately, there are no visuals needed to play the game, so it's fully blind accessible. So we're going to listen to about 10, 20 seconds of a launch video, which is just audio, so you can get a sense for the feel of the game.
Why would it be my father's dying wish to send me to the borderlands?
You, Alex, are officially home.
My lord,
What is it?
Odettan riders from the northwest.
Wait here, Alex.
Uncle? Uncle!
All right, so as you can probably tell, it's aspiring to be sort of a relatively gritty medieval setting, sort of Game of Thrones-like, without as much adult content. So it should be accessible to people who are like 10 and up. And just to give you some idea, because I won't really touch on the game as much, or sort of indirectly through what I learned from making the game, is essentially there's two major components of the gameplay. There's exploration, where you're moving through a big open space where you can hear little sound details in the space, and you use basically tank controls by turning and hearing the soundscape move around you. You use a controller. You move towards these items or objects, and the big obvious beacons are things like the blacksmith shop or the tavern, and things that you traditionally know what you're going to get there. You're going to be buying weapons in the blacksmith shop, or you're going to be picking up quests in the tavern. But there are also little details in the soundscape. You might hear like a dog barking in the corner. You can go up, interact with them. It becomes a companion. There's little secrets hidden around the world, and that's the exploration aspect. That would also unfold in sort of more traditional dungeon-like settings, where you can hear monsters and avoid them or engage with them. And then there's combat, which is ranged, where you can sort of line up targets and shoot. But eventually, you're going to draw them to you, or you're going to run to them, and it's going to trigger melee combat, which basically locks the player in place. You draw your sword, and then you're swinging with the controller at different locations, as enemies have different patterns, and there's different tells, and you can block and counterattack. Again, the game's being demoed in the room over there if you want to try it out, and you probably get a better sense of what I'm talking about. So why the Vale? Initially, the reason why I wanted to do this game was I wanted to continue developing storytelling through gameplay. So this was something that I could do on any scale. I could do it with smaller games. I could do it with a pinball role-playing game we made. But I also wanted to return to telling slightly bigger stories. Stories that have multiple characters, interwoven plots, branching, and obviously that can get costly, so the fact that I was doing something in all audio afforded me the chance to do that. I also want to focus on things I was good at. I'm not an artist, so I have been an art director before, but that's mainly because of my film background. I had some sensibilities, but there's so many people better than me at that. I thought, well, if I've got to do something on my own, it should probably be centered around narrative and working with actors in a voice booth. So externally, I also wanted to provide gamers with a novel perspective. This was, in terms of the sighted population, this was still novel. I just thought it would be an interesting person to be, a character to be have a blind protagonist that had these trials they had to go through in this great, noisy, medieval world. And I thought that was just novel to me. I thought that would be a cool experience. And then VR brought the real-time binaural audio to a platform that I could use it. I didn't have to make any technology for this. I'm leveraging, there's lots of plugins, but I'm leveraging the Oculus plugin for Unity to do the binaural audio. And then I very quickly, and probably should have realized this from the very moment I had this idea, that there's an underserved audience that could really use this game, and that's, of course, people who are low vision or visually impaired, where They have a lot of access to, obviously, music. They have access to film and television through descriptive audio, but there's very little access to mainstream games. And at the very least, I would be doing something that's a slightly bigger experience. There are all audio games out there, but to do something big and ambitious is relatively rare in this space, maybe once a year. And then if you're a hardcore gamer and you play one game a year, that's a limited amount of choice you have. So the learning curve. So first of all, I was not a member of the blind community. I also didn't know many people from the blind community. So I went to the CNIB. I said, hey, I want to make this game. They said, oh, that's great. And they put me in touch with a guy named Martin Cassels, and he was their technology expert, and he's also a gamer. So he was a great in for me for this to this community. I got to learn that this community, we had play tests. The community is incredibly diverse, which shouldn't have been, it should have been pretty obvious to me, in that, they're brought together by a common denominator of having low vision or no vision, but this transcends age, gender, race. So that also makes the game tricky. I often like to have a fairly focused audience when you're thinking of who is this game for, and now I have hardcore video game players that are playing sighted games, fighters, they're doing speed runs of Zelda, who have a real interesting Twitch gameplay, and then I have somebody who's excited that they might be able to play a video game. And my game is their first video game. So I am going to try to straddle that to some extent. I think a lot of narrative-focused games have that as a possibility. You've got games like The Witcher that have like a story-only mode where I think Uncharted does the same thing where you can, the combat is secondary, all these things are very easy to do and you can just move through the story. So I'm going to have something like that to sort of hopefully bridge that huge gap. And the public demoing was an interesting learning curve. Background noise is obviously an issue. If you're like at PAX West or some big trade show, it's super noisy. So you got to figure out ways of making your game work in those settings. It's hard to know what players are doing. There's no visuals. So you just see someone playing and making all these eyes expressions and stuff, and I have no idea what's going on. So I have another headset I can listen in. But even if I have something to tell them, they have a headset on, so I can't communicate with them. So it does make that a little bit tricky. That's a second note. And I had to learn the new audio tools, and I had to learn design techniques. I wasn't a very competent audio designer, and I've been working on that in making this game. Also, a side note, I'll probably talk about this in another talk or with people on the side, but I worked with quite a few visually impaired performers, and there's they have these incredible techniques they employ to be able to give incredibly natural performances on cold reads without being able to see the words. They actually do playback, two of them at least, did playback in real time to their head and said the lines as an actor and nailed it. And I still don't know the magic that they've employed. I think it's called practice is how they did that. So what do producers love about these games? They're cost effective. Google Text-to-Speech is really easy for prototyping. I'm sure some people use this anyway in their games. Obviously, you can have narrative delivered through text, but the experience and the pacing is a little bit heightened when you aren't just having to read text that will eventually be replaced by VO. You can use Google to generate with different accents your different characters. You can get a sense for pacing, and I could make the entire game with this robot voice and then eventually replace it after maybe editing out quite a bit of the stuff I don't need, and then it saves on production time for voice recording. There's accessible for the blind community. So this does represent a pretty high floor, I found out. I put out a demo on a website which I thought might have been defunct at first. It was called audiogames.net. It just isn't, the upkeep isn't great visually because it's mostly, the forums are used by visually impaired computer users. And I immediately got 300 people who wanted to play the game. And when I put it out there, 200 people responded to the survey. Like, it was crazy. The conversion rate was nuts. So it does represent to me like a pretty good solid floor of like, yeah, at least 400 people might buy this game, which for an indie dev is not a terrible place to start, considering how noisy the space is and how you could sell no games. I think there's plenty of room for ambitious projects. There's a lot of little audio games around, but for anybody who wants to tell a big, robust story, again, I'd be happy, or I think to get 10 games a year with that kind of size would be a huge boon for the community, and you really wouldn't start cannibalizing yourself at that point. I think there's a lot of room for this. You know what? If it does, the space does fill up, that's only going to be good for this community. So I'm all for that. it's good PR for your company in general. A lot of people will write about your game, and a lot of non-game outlets will pick it up as a story. And I think that will continue to happen for some time. It's a super welcoming community. They have a lot of opinions about things, a lot of diverse opinion, but I've never been on a forum that's more generous to a developer. There's no trolls. If there's any trollish little comment, people get on that and slam it pretty quickly. So I found them super awesome to work with. I'm also very reliant on them because they're testing my game and giving me feedback. And I still think it's novel for wider game community. I've been surprised as I bring this to shows that, I'm aware of all the other all-audio games out there that are doing something maybe not quite this big, but similarly large, and people don't even know it's happened yet. So for me, that's potentially an opportunity, for a while anyway, to sort of maybe pick up in the general game community some people buying the game or being interested in the game for the novelty of it. Because with binaural audio and that ASMR response you get and the intimacy of the experience, I think it's still quite novel for people. So creatives love the creative freedom, so it's easy to add characters and settings and branching stories. I want to add a dog, I get a dog pack, or I actually I recorded my own dog making like cute noises and stuff, and now I got a dog in the game. I didn't have to model him. I didn't have to get some fur technology going on the dog. I just had a dog with some sound. Same goes with that. I want a desert. I can get a desert pack. Relatively easy to do. Engaging, immersive, intimate. Things that are very close tend to matter in this binaural space. So, you're getting rid of the big vistas that you get and the awe moments you might get in like a game like, Skyrim or something with a big, huge mountainscape or something. That goes away, but what you get in return is the little intimate things you hear around somebody, and I think it really focuses gameplay in a different direction, which is novel and, again, quite more emotionally engaging, I find. Especially when it comes to actors talking closely to you. You can feel that intimacy, and I think you don't get that quite as readily with the visual games. And it, again, accentuates these emotional moments. When people come close, you get that ASMR response. People talk about having a spine-tingling feeling when they're playing the game, and it's a surprise to them. So some people really have that response quite strongly. There's few technical distractions, like in an indie game. If the hair tech's not very good or the face effects kind of sucks, my face effects is amazing. Like, everything is perfect. Nothing takes you out of the experience because the experience is entirely built in your head around the audio that's around you. I know that players are listening with this specific adaptation. This is probably the biggest crux for doing more audio stuff in the bigger visual space, is that people will constantly say, well, we don't know if the gamer is going to have a headset on. We don't know if they're even going to have their audio on, so we can't rely on this as a mechanic. So I'm hoping this will start changing that a little bit. But at the very least, I know in this specific delivery, people have a headset on. People are going to hear every word that you're putting out there, which is a luxury that you don't usually have. And this is an audio designer's dream. So people who are musicians and audio designers who are usually they're the last of the party. Nobody cares. Everyone's like, just please go away, please go away. We're trying to finish this game because everyone's pushing visuals. They're the stars of this show, so you'll find a lot of people very excited to work on your project. So what are some of the cool things we got to do in this game? So for one, I added a dog companion. Everybody likes dog companions, and yes, you can pet the dog. The dog does not die, spoiler. But it was so easy to just flag this dog, and every single instance where the dog could be doing something, it was so easy to insert him and then have maybe just a comment from the character. And I did this so cheaply, but my God, that would have been so much work if you had to visually render a dog and have it pathing AI and all that stuff. Visceral moments work so well, some sort of surprising ones. Horror is an obvious place to go with creepy things around your head, but things like falling from height, having the soundscapes race by you as you're falling, in this case to your death, so it's maybe not the most positive experience, but it sounds amazing, it feels amazing, more so than I've ever felt. Maybe a VR experience is sort of approaching that. Being pulled underwater and having the soundscape shift in your head so everything changes to the high end is gone and there's bubbles and stuff like that. That's something that feels super visceral in that scenario. And anytime you're being swarmed or there's things moving around your head in space is accentuated. So combat and gameplay can happen anywhere. This is something I've really taken advantage of, and the fact that I could do it, I did it, I love it, and if I do a visual game, I'm gonna do more of this. So the main idea is that I can have, for example, I could be in a shop, and I could have you get in an argument with the blacksmith and then have a fight. And it's something I never considered doing. And it really started here, actually, with narrative being developed everywhere. So I realized, well, I have a shop. The fallback for a shop is to have, statistical information, maybe some pictures of the items, and you're going, everyone accepts that convention. You're stepped out of the immersive gameplay because it's just easier to navigate a shop through a menu with some words. But in this case, I didn't have that. I had to use audio. So now the shop is an interesting shop owner selling his wares, developing character, and you're developing your character as you respond to what you think of his items. So it's now forced its way into being a character developing moment, and then to play up on that, I could have him fight you. And there's no big transition to another space. The one I like the most is there's the scenario for being in a tavern. And getting quests in a tavern is rather than having you have to painstakingly go and talk to people. I basically have you in it sort of like a film, montage, sort of cycle through moments of interest. It actually sounds like a montage where you hear someone starting to talk, and if you don't like where it's going, you can flip to the next one. Like you're kind of moving around and getting all the interesting elements or options available to you in terms of taking quests. Well, at one point in the middle of someone talking, you hear something go by you. There's an element in the game where you have a magic ability to listen to certain magic items. Well, this thing walks by you, and I literally just drop you out of the conversation, and now you're following it through the bar. And again, that was so inexpensive to do, and I could do stuff like that. And again, now in all my visual games, I like to employ more of those sort of surprising, emerging gameplay moments out of things that are accepted convention, like dialogue trees or shop interactions. Even maps have story. As you're deciding where to go, you can get in an argument with your partner as to which way you're going to go on this map. And finally, accessible content, just a list of a couple things why I think, hey, maybe there's some room here for this to grow. I get a lot of requests to look at ways to bring what I'm doing to the Alexa and Google Home. Certainly Amazon's looking for this content, and I think it would port very easily, or more easily to that. Obviously original audio-based games like the one I'm making, made for PC or mobile. Blind accessible modes and mods. This is maybe a community-driven thing, but I'm always thinking of, God, what would I do if I worked with the Call of Duty team? Like, what could we make a version of Call of Duty where you would have someone who's attached, tethered, in a fire team scenario to a sighted player running around, and then the visually impaired player is just listening to the soundscape and shooting with more auto-aiming or something. Not that that's a terribly great pitch, but the point is I think there is room to think about that. And again, it's probably more community-based, less financially based sort of ideas. And then finally, what I hope some people here already have this is that porting content, whether it's audio content, or podcasts, but even like text stuff, to a format that's accessible through audio. And I think there's a tremendous amount of, if somebody has a really great text game they've made, they could potentially get a grant or something to maybe get it voiced and then make it accessible. And I think the high bar, because most people in the community would love to play the games their friends are playing. So even though I hope they want to play my game, I know they really want to play The Witcher, I know they really want to play Call of Duty. So for me, it's think of how much audio content is in these games. Millions of dollars of audio content exists there. And I'm hoping someday somebody will look to unlock that for the community. So I'll do questions afterwards, but that's the end of my talk, and I hope it was somewhat informative, and thank you for having me here.